Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining today's session. So today, my name is Joel Ricketts. I'm a senior cloud solution architect here with Microsoft. And in today's session, we're going to talk about Power Automate. So we're going to go over a kind of an overview of basics of what Power Automate is, some of the components, some of the things that you can do with it. And then we're going to look at a real world solution with Exchange Online and solving a real world issue with a no code, low code type automation with Power Automate. So let's jump right in. So what is Power Automate and how does it help me? So what Power Automate does is allow you to quickly and securely create automations, all types of automation, from personal productivity all the way to scale that out to enterprise um, type services and process and things like that. And it's really there to automate those repetitive, mundane tasks with ease. And as Exchange administrators, we all know that anything that we can automate can make our lives easier. It can reduce errors, save time, work smarter, right? And that's really what Power Automate is going to provide for you. Another mechanism for you to create very simple to very complex automations. And with these cloud services, right, you can automate anywhere at any time. You can access Power Automate through the web. There's a Power Automate desktop version, and you can also work with Power Automate to an extent over a mobile device. So you can, as the slide says there, you can automate anywhere at any time. So my presentation today, I'm going to try not to bore you a lot with PowerPoints. This is going to be mostly demos and actually working with the product and showing you what it can do, and then turning it towards working specifically with what it can do for you for Exchange Online. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over here to Power Automate, the interface here. Now, if you'd like to follow along or just kind of poke around in Power Automate, to get to it, you simply go to make.powerautomate.com. You can see up here at the top. If you want to start using it and kind of play around with it as we're going through stuff, feel free to do that. But Power Automate, again, tool that allows you to create automations quickly and easily. So in Power Automate, what we do is we create these automations, and they're called flows. You may have heard that term before. Power Automate actually used to be called Microsoft Flow, but it was rebranded to Power Automate and brought up under as one of the components of the overall Power Platform. So when you create a flow, there's three components to a flow. Two main components we're going to talk about here, and then we'll talk about the third one here in just a little bit. So this is a flow that I have here. That's a very common, like personal, think of it as a personal productivity type flow. What this flow is going to do is it's going to monitor an email box. And when an email arrives in that inbox, it's going to download the attachments and place them into OneDrive. That's essentially what this flow is going to do. So I'm going to kind of walk through this flow here for you and talk about the basic components of any flow that you create. So here, the first component up at the very top, we call this the trigger. And any flow that you create is going to have a trigger. And as the name implies, the trigger is what is going to start the flow. And there's a number of different types of triggers that you can have for your flows. This trigger that you see here, we would call this an automated trigger because this happens when a new email arrives in the inbox. So that this flow is going to start anytime that the email box that this particular trigger is monitoring. This will initiate that the arrival of that email will trigger this flow. Now, here you can see down here, these are the connections that are associated with this, and this would be the mailbox that we're monitoring. So with this trigger, you can monitor this mailbox, which is my personal mailbox here in my test environment, but you can add another connection down here if you need it to monitor, like say, for example, a shared mailbox or maybe another mailbox in your environment. So this is the trigger right here. Every single flow that you create, no matter what it does, it's going to have a trigger. That's always the first thing that you create with the flow. And you establish that trigger. Before we move on, there is a couple of different types of triggers as well. So this is, like I mentioned, the automated type trigger up here because it works when a new email arrives in an inbox. You also have a manual trigger. So depending on what you want to do, maybe you only want this flow to start when you tell it to start. That would be an example of a manual trigger. And the other common type of trigger that you would have in a flow would be a scheduled trigger. So for example, you could, excuse me, you could say run this flow every Friday at 7 p.m., for example. So that would be an example of a manual trigger. But our trigger here, again, automated trigger, it is going to initiate the flow when a new email arrives in the inbox that we're connected to. Now, a couple more things about this particular trigger here. If you hit the advanced options, you have some more capabilities here. You can filter it by recipient email addresses, who's in the to field, who's in the CC field, who it's from, so on and so forth, if you only want it to monitor specific messages or all messages. So for this flow that we're doing here, save attachments, any email that comes in with an attachment, save it to OneDrive. We just want it to monitor any email that has attachments located on it. So anytime an email comes into the inbox with an attachment, it's going to trigger this flow and it's going to start. Okay, the next component of the flow is the actions that take place after that trigger has been initiated. And the flows flow in a serial progression. If you think about it, they're all going to start with the trigger and then they're going to flow down here as you see this error. And our first action here is going to be what's called a condition. So once that email arrives into the inbox, we're going to have a condition that looks at the from address of that email. And what you see here is this from address. This is what we call dynamic content right here. This dynamic content is being passed down to this step as the trigger or from the trigger. So we're going to say if the from address is equal to johndoe@contoso.com, then we're going to take certain actions. And that's what this condition statement is doing here. This is an example of an action. And in a flow, remember, you have the trigger and then you have actions. So you always only have one trigger in your flow, and then you can have a number of different actions under it. So what this condition is doing is making a decision based on the from address of that email. Now, if the condition, as it says here, is equal to John Doe, our flow is then going to move over to the yes side of the branch. It creates two branches here. You can see on the left side we have yes, and on the right side we have no. So if the from address is equal to John Doe, The flow is going to go over to the yes side and then execute the actions that are located in the yes side of the branch. Or think of this as maybe like a fork in the road, right? We come to that fork, we make a decision. So if the attachments, let me scroll down just a bit here. If the attachments are from John Doe, or the from address equals John Doe, we're going to take that attachments, and this attachments here again is more dynamic content that was passed down from the top of the flow, the actual data for the attachments. We're going to take those attachments and we're going to save them to OneDrive for Business in a folder path called Attachments from John. The file name we're going to give it is the name of the attachment. And again, you can see we're using what's called dynamic content here. So it's going to be the file name that was actually attached to the email. And then the actual content of the file itself. Again, this content is what we call dynamic content. So it's the actual data for that file. Now, if the email from address does not equal John Doe, then our condition is going to just send us right down here to the no side of the branch and essentially perform the exact same actions, except that it's just going to save it in a different OneDrive for Business folder called All Other Email Attachments. So this is an example of a relatively simple personal productivity type automation that you can create with Power Automate. This is a very common thing that a lot of people within organizations do. They get emails with attachments to them, and then they have to either maybe archive that data somewhere, or perhaps they need to send it to save it to a file share so that other people can consume that content. And oftentimes it's a very, very manual task. And while it seems like a relatively simple process, right? Just to, when your email comes in, you right click and you save the attachments to your OneDrive. And then maybe that OneDrive folder that you save it to is shared and other people can get to it. But that's an example of a very repetitive, very manual, mundane task. Maybe it's something you do every day. Maybe only takes a couple minutes to do it. But you could, if you're in a hurry, maybe you save it to the wrong folder and then somebody calls you and says, hey, I didn't see those file attachments. Those manual processes can introduce errors. You have to go back and resave it. Maybe you do it 2 to 3 times a day, right? And think if that took 2 to 3 minutes each time over the span of the course of a work week, that's 30 minutes of your time every week that you would spend just saving file attachments. And you expand that out over, a month. That's a couple hours of your time a month. Spin that out over like a quarter of a year. That's almost, excuse me, 4 hours over the course of an entire year. That's almost a week of your time that you've saved. You've almost automated your very own vacation time because you've saved so much time. You have a lot of time left over to do other things, and you've reduced errors. So that's really what Power Automate can really help you do from a personal productivity standpoint. Okay, so again, just to summarize, we walked through this flow. All flows start with the trigger. This is an automated trigger when the new email arrives in an inbox. And then we execute these different actions down here. So I'm going to step right back here. I'm going to hit this back arrow here, and this is going to take me to what's called, I'll call it the control panel of the flow here, just to show you a couple other things about this specific flow. This is going to be the control panel of the flow. Here in the middle screen, you got a number of details about this flow. The name of it, the description, the owner of the flow. The different status is this flow turned on. So you can, even if your flows are automated or manual or scheduled, you can turn your flows on and off so that they don't run if you don't want them to. And you have some other pertinent information here in the control panel of this flow. Created time, modified, the type of trigger, it's an automated trigger. And then the plan it's running on. And I'll talk about that here in just a few moments. Now, I said there were three components to any flow that when we first started. The first two we talked about were the trigger, which starts the flow, and then all the actions that take place. The third component of most flows that you're going to create is called connections. And connections are, think of them as the connections into the data sources that you're going to be using. So for this flow, I am using a connection into Exchange Online or Office 365 Outlook, as the name is titled here. And I'm also using a connection into OneDrive for Business. Both of these connections are associated with my personal email account. So this is again, kind of a personal productivity scenario here, just for me to save attachments from certain people and save them to certain folders based on who it's from. So those are connections, and those are kind of the third component that you're going to have with every flow. Also, with every flow that you create, you're going to have what's called a run history. And this is just a log of every time that this flow is initiated. So you can see here in my run history, I have one instance this flow has ran 2 hours ago. Only took 36 milliseconds to complete that manual process that would usually take me 2 minutes. So you can see there's a significant time savings there. And then also the status of the flow in that instance of the flow succeeded. Because we keep a 28 run day history, if you have this happening 4, 5, 10, 20, 30 times a day, you can come here and see any of the instances that failed. If you want to get more details on any of the instances that maybe failed, or just look at the ones that completed, you just click on the run history. And you can see the run history is formatted just like the Flow Designer where you created it. So we have our trigger up top, and then everything flows down from the trigger. You can click on these in the run history and get the pertinent information about all the data that's associated with that trigger, the data that it pulled in from Exchange. And then you can look at the condition, get some details on the expression result was false. So because this expression was false, we moved over here to the no side of the branch. Also, with the run history, you get an indication of each step, whether it completed successfully or not. So you can see here, based on the green check marks, that means each of those actions and the trigger that initiated it all successfully ran. And you can also see here, because the expression result equals false and the condition sent us over to this side of the branch, the yes/no branch, we didn't execute any of the actions that are stored here in the yes side of the branch. So that's run history. Very good place to go look when you're creating your flows and testing them to see if they're running successfully, to get information on maybe where they failed, if they did fail, so on and so forth. Also, this is a new feature that they just lit up here process insights. If your flows are taking a long time to run, they can give you some insight on not only how your average duration of your flows, but how you can improve them as well. So one final thing I want to show you here, talk about that third component of any flow, which is called the connections. So you can see here I have two connections, one for Outlook, Office 365 Outlook, one for OneDrive for Business. But those aren't the only connectors you can use. If you look over here on the left-hand navigation pane, you have this connectors section within the Power Automate portal. If you click on connectors here, and as soon as it loads up, there we go. We're going to scroll down and you can see there is lots of connectors. We're going to scroll down here to the common ones. So Power Automate is going to come with a majority of your Office 365 licensing. So you more than likely have access to it today. You can start using Power Automate today with all of our popular connectors, Office 365 Outlook, OneDrive for Business. That's what we just used, or that was what was just used in that example flow. There's a Teams connector, Planner, Forms. So all of the popular Microsoft cloud-based services, all of the connectors are included with your basic Office 365 licensing. You even have connections into third-party clouds as well. Twitter, Gmail, Dropbox, YouTube down here, if you see down here at the bottom. So Power Automate is not limited to just the Microsoft cloud. You can leverage this to orchestrate automation between these third-party clouds. So for example, you could create an automation to monitor your company's YouTube channel maybe. And whenever your company posts a new YouTube video to their YouTube channel, you could make an announcement on Twitter. So you can create that orchestration between those two third-party clouds with Power Automate. Now, before we move on from the connectors here, you'll notice that some connectors do say premium next to them. These connectors will require additional Power Automate per user licensing if they have that premium symbol under those connectors. So just keep that in mind. But for any of these premium connectors, if you want to try them out, you get a 90-day trial to use any of the premium connectors. And again, you can see I can just scroll down through here and lots and lots of connectors to many, many different services. Okay, the final area I want to show you here, templates. So templates are a place for you to easily get started with Power Automate. Most of the things from a personal productivity, you can probably find a template for. And if we just scroll down here, I'll just show you real quick. The automation that I just showed you about saving attachments from Office 365 to OneDrive for Business, there's a template right there for that. And this is the template that I use to create that automation that I just showed you. So you can click on this. It'll all you have to do is tell it what mailbox you want to connect into and the name of your OneDrive folder. So within 5 minutes, you can create an automation that could save you hours and hours of time over, a month or a year, so on and so forth, depending on how many times you do it. And you can see here, you can just keep scrolling for more and more templates. There's all kinds of scenarios out here that you can get started with very quickly and easily. The templates are also categorized by different scenarios, remote work, approval scenarios. So approval scenarios are a big component of Power Automate. Email, calendar, mobile, so on and so forth. And you also have the ability to search templates as well. So let's say, for example, you're wanting to maybe automate something with Excel. You could click it, type Excel in there, and you can see all of these templates related to Microsoft Excel. Here's a real good one. Save new email attachments in SharePoint and add a row to an Excel file. So those are the examples of some of the things that you can do with Power Automate. So now what I want to do, let's switch back over to the PowerPoint real quick here. So we talked about how Power Automate allows you to automate very quickly and easily, not only as a personal productivity scenario, kind of what we just saw there, but you can also use it as an enterprise service. So let's talk about how we could solve a real world problem that Exchange administrators may face, and some of you may even face this today. So this is a real world problem that I've worked with customers before to try and solve. It's the creation of mailboxes. I've worked with countless number of customers that still create mailboxes in Exchange Online, and it's a very manual process. So in Contoso, right? Contoso IT, lovely Contoso. The EXO mailbox creation, it's a very manual process. Currently, what they do is they have HR sending emails to the manager of the new employee for approval, right? And then that manager sends an email to the IT team or the Exchange team and says, hey, we need a new mailbox created for this new employee. And a lot of times, again, that's a very manual process. A lot of times, these emails don't contain the required information, right? And then IT or the Exchange team has to go back and say, hey, I need their, I need their alias, I need their employee ID, I need this, I need that, in order to be able to create the mailbox properly, right? And it can be a lot of back and forth. So what we want to do with Contoso here is completely automate this process. And we're going to do that with, you guessed it, right? Power Automate. So what we're going to use Power Automate to do is orchestrate this entire process and connect into multiple cloud technologies. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Microsoft form where the HR person can go to and fill this form out to request a new mailbox for the new employee. Then what's going to happen is Power Automate is going to start an approval process. And Power Automate is going to send an approval or a request for an approval for the manager to review or reject the creation of that new mailbox. If the manager creates or approves the new mailbox, then what we're going to do is we're going to use something called Azure Automation to kick off a PowerShell script that will connect to Exchange Online and create the new mailbox for us. Then finally, what we're going to do, once that new mailbox is created, Power Automate is going to send an email to the HR team with the information about the mailbox, the user's login name, their initial password, and some other pertinent information so that they can then provide the user that information and they're able to log in. And this process is going to be 100% completely automated. The Exchange Online admin team, it does not really even have to get involved here with the creation of this mailbox. Okay, and we're going to use Power Automate to orchestrate all of that. Okay, so let me jump back over to Power Automate. Let me move this over here and bring up Okay. Bring this down here. Sorry about that delay there. Okay. Okay. So I've already created a flow called New Exchange Online Mailbox Request. So this is the flow that I have created to orchestrate this entire process of creating that mailbox. And it's an automated trigger. So let's double click into here and look at how this flow is created and exactly what it's doing. Okay, so here on the surface, looks pretty simple, right? So what we're going to do, our trigger, whenever an HR person connects to our form and submits the data, this flow is going to trigger. It's going to grab all the details from that flow. We're going to create an approval scenario. And then based on the outcome of that approval, we're going to take different actions based on the outcome of that approval. So at a very high level, that's essentially what we're going to do. It's a pretty simple, right? At a high level, pretty simple uh, process flow. And just as any other flow, we start with our trigger and then we work our way down to the bottom in that sequential order. And you can see that here, right? Designated by those errors. Okay, so let's dive into this. So here, I am monitoring a form right here that I created. It's a form called New Office 365 Mailbox Request. And on that form, I have a list of questions that HR will have to fill out with all the required data that I need. So once HR submits that form response, the first thing this flow is going to do once it's triggered is it's going to get all of the details of that form. And let me just switch over to the form here to show it to you real quick. This is the form I've created. So here just for demonstration purposes, I've entered the bare minimum of the information that I need in order to create a mailbox. So the flow is going to be passed a first name, it's going to be passed a last name, an employee ID, the manager's name, and then the manager's email address. So those are the things that I am going to collect from this form and is going to be passed into the flow. So this data is going to be passed into the flow anytime a response is submitted, right? So anytime anybody answers that, boom, goes down here. We get all of those form details. The next thing we're going to do, once we have those form details, we're going to start an approval process because in our organization, we don't want any mailboxes created unless it's approved by the employee's manager, right? Because that's going to consume a license. So what the approval process is going to be doing is it's going to be an approval type here is approve, reject, first to respond. And what this really means, anybody who's assigned the approval, anybody who approves or rejects it will consider that approval approved or rejected. Now, the assigned to address, as you can see here, we're going to get that information from Microsoft Forms. So we're going to grab the manager's email address that we got from here, just like that. And that email address is going to be placed in the assigned to field, and then the manager will get an email once this approval process starts. Now, within that email, the manager will see the first name of the user that we need a mailbox created for. They're going to get the last name, and they're going to get the time that it was submitted. So they'll have all of that pertinent information. There's a lot more data you could add in there that's passed down from response details if you needed, or depending on the questions that you create in forms, you can add additional information there. Now, again, this is called start and wait for an approval. So basically what's going to happen here when we get to this step, Power Automate is going to basically pause, and it's not going to execute any more steps lower down in the process until the manager responds to this particular approval. It'll basically pause there. Now, by default, Power Automate will actually wait up to 30 days for that approval to be completed. But you can, if you click on the ellipses here, under settings here, you can set a specific timeout value for this if you want to. So if you have like a time sensitive approval scenario, if it needs to be done within an hour, maybe 2 hours, you can set timeout values on this. So that's what's going to happen next. Now, once the approval has been completed, we are then going to pass that data down to a condition, which is kind of just like what we saw earlier. In the save attachments, we're going to use that same action called a condition. Now, what this condition is based on is the outcome of the approval. So you can see there again, dynamic content. So this step, the start and wait for an approval, is going to pass down the outcome, and the outcome can be approve or rejected, right? So what this condition is going to do, if the condition is equal to approve, the condition is going to send us over here. So if it's approved, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a job in Azure Automation. And what Azure Automation is, it is a component of Azure that's going to allow you to deliver cloud-based automation to a number of different services. Very powerful tool. If you're not familiar with Azure Automation, I'll just paste a link here in the chat window if you want to take a look at it. There for you if you want to take a look at it. But Azure Automation, what I've done is I've created a PowerShell script in Azure Automation that's going to connect to Exchange Online PowerShell and then run the new dash mailbox request. So let me show you the PowerShell script that I've created in Azure Automation here. Very simple PowerShell script here. I want to put these side by side for you here, just so you can kind of see this. Okay. So we're going to create a job in Azure Automation. Azure Automation does require an Azure subscription. Also, this create job action here, this is a part of the premium actions or components. You can get, if you want to try this out, after the session, Power Automate, you can get a free 90-day trial and you can try these out. So we're going to, I've created the Azure Automation, and what Azure Automation has is things called runbooks, and I've created a runbook here. Okay, so I'm basically going to initiate this runbook, and then I have 3 parameters down here. You can see here I have first name, last name, and employee ID. And these are dynamic content right here. And they're coming back from, it's the data that I collected from that Microsoft form. So let me scroll up here. And these dynamic contents relate directly to variables that I'm going to be passing to my PowerShell script. So this action is going to pass the data that's collected from the forms right into my PowerShell script for me. Now, real quickly, I want to just take a look at this PowerShell script for you so you can see it here. This is PowerShell script, is going to be using modern authentication to connect to Exchange Online. I've declared a couple variables here to create my UPN for that user and also create an initial password for that user. Initial password for the users going to be their last name plus their employee ID. I'm then simply going to issue a new mailbox request there. And that's what creates the mailbox, right? And then I'm going to set an extension attribute here. This is going to be used for group-based licensing so that once this account is created in Office 365, it will automatically apply a license to that user. So this is my PowerShell script here. Pretty simple PowerShell script just to create that mailbox. Let me move this back over here. Let's jump back over to Power Automate. Now scrolling down. Now once that job is completed, I have a second control down here. So if my job provisioning status, which is this dynamic content here, is equal to succeed, we're going to go over here to the yes side of the branch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to send an email to the person who originally requested this mailbox, which is going to be in our little organization here, the HR representative. And they're going to get this email right here. Oops, right there. And we know their email address because we get the responder's email address or the person who submitted the request way up there at the top from forms. So we're basically going to send them an email message. Your request for a new Exchange Online mailbox has been created. It's going to give them the first name and the last name. It's going to tell them who approved it right there. It's going to provide the HR representative their UPN, which you can see right there. And then we don't tell them exactly what the password is because we don't want that in email. So we're just going to say the initial password is their last name plus their employee ID. And then the HR person, can contact the new employee, provide them information, let them know that's where they can go to log into their mailbox. And if you have any problems, contact our support team, right? So that's what's going to happen if the script successfully executes. Now, if the script doesn't successfully execute, so if provisioning status is not equal to succeeded, we're going to go down here. And what this is going to do is send an email to our group mailbox or our shared mailbox for the EXO admin team. And it's just going to alert us that the automation job did not complete. It's going to give them information on the mailbox that we tried to create, and then some specifics about the actual job that did not complete so that they can go investigate that. And if they need to, maybe manually create that mailbox. So now I'm going to scroll up here to the very top, or not the very top, but coming back to this first condition. So basically, everything I just explained there happens if the request is approved, right? So if the request is not approved, basically the condition is going to send us over here. And if that is the case, all I'm going to do is send an email to the person who submitted the form and let them know that the manager rejected their request for the new mailbox and excuse me, requesting or that it has been rejected by the response approver and the response approver can put comments in there. So maybe they could say, this person doesn't actually need a mailbox, or, whatever the reason may be that they rejected the particular um, mailbox creation. Okay. So now, right, you want to see this work. So let's see if this actually works. We're going to do a live demo here. These are always fun. And we have just a few moments left. So let's create a new mailbox in Exchange Online. So I'm going to be the HR person. I'm going to create a mailbox for, let's just call them, their first name is Mech. And their last name is going to be Technical Airlift, right? I'll give them an employee ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Their manager is going to be D. Mark. And their email address is dmark@azurelab.email. Okay. So here, before I hit submit, I'm just going to come over here to the active users. Here's a list of my current active users. Give it a good old refresh. You can see here, there's no mailbox here called Mech Technical Airlift, right? Don't have the mailbox yet. Also come over here to my Exchange Online. We'll refresh this here. My Exchange Online Admin Center, I should say. Mailboxes, and you can see there is no Mech Technical Airlift mailbox there. Okay, so we know we don't have a mailbox. So now I'm going to submit this form. And within about a minute, we should have a mailbox created. So now the form was submitted. And it should auto kick off here in just a moment. Let's go to the run history. I'm going to show you this real quick. So here it is right here, just initiated automatically. Current status is running. So the first thing you remember it's going to do, it's going to collect the form details, and then it's going to start and wait for an approval. So you can see right here, we have this little yellow, it looks like a timer. That means this flow is paused at this moment, waiting for the approver to respond. So let me go here. Let me pull this over here. Here is the approver's mailbox. I'm going to hit right here. Here is our approval request. So me as the approver, I can see the first name is Mech. Last name is Technical Airlift. I'm going to approve this mailbox. And I'm going to click submit. Now within, roughly 30 seconds or so, I should have a mailbox in Exchange Online. And if you look here, right back at the run history, updated in real time, you can see this took about a minute. So it took about a minute for me to respond to that. So now if I click on this, you can see here, right now it is running my PowerShell script. Because the output of the expression there, the condition was true. Running my PowerShell script. It's done with the PowerShell script. Me as the approver, if you see this here, here is the dynamic content that I put in there. So my new mailbox is mech@azurelab.email. There's my first name, last name, or this is who it was approved by, DMARC reports. And then the also note that I put in there about the first pass. So now, real quickly, I know we're running out of time here. If I hit refresh here, let's go to Exchange first because it's got a backsync there to Azure. Let's hit refresh. Here is my mailbox right down here. user mailbox created, completely automated for us. And in just a few moments, that mailbox will show up here in my M365 admin center. Let's just hit refresh. There it is right there. 100% automated. Azure group-based licensing will come in just a few minutes and automatically license that mailbox for us. All right, we're right at 12:50. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. I hope all of your questions were addressed in the chat. If there is any questions you have for me, I don't mind hanging around a few minutes. If that's okay with the event coordinators, I don't mind hanging around if you want to come off of mute and ask any questions. Oh, Jason asked, can we get a copy of this Power Automate? Most definitely.